Picture this for a moment. You're 71 years old. It's a quiet Tuesday morning, and the kitchen is yours alone. The kettle warming, the light coming in sideways the way it does this time of year. You reach for the bottle of olive oil you've kept on that counter for 30 years. The one your doctor nodded at. The one the magazines praised. You pour it over your eggs, and you feel something close to peace. Because you believe, and you've been told for decades, that you're doing right by your heart. And you are. Let me say that clearly, right at the start, so there's no confusion later. That olive oil is a good thing. I'm not here to take it off your counter, but here's what nobody told you in a 15-minute appointment. While you were reaching for that bottle, there was something else in your pantry, small, plain, easy to overlook, probably sitting in a bag behind the flour, that the research of the last 20 years suggests may be doing something for your arteries that the oil alone cannot. Not a miracle, not a replacement for anything, but a quiet, well-studied food that actually works on the wall of your blood vessels in a way most people over 60 have never had explained to them. I'm Dr. Evan Jace, and on this channel I do one thing. I take what the real evidence says, the actual studies, not the headlines, and I translate it into plain language you can act on by tomorrow morning. No hype, no fear. Just the honest version of the conversation I wish every one of my patients got to have without a clock ticking on the wall. So, before we go any further, I want to ask you something, and I'd love for you to answer down in the comments. Where are you watching from this morning? Type your town. I read them, and it reminds me that on the other side of this camera is a real person with a real kitchen, and a real heart worth protecting. Now, that small food in your pantry is the walnut. And by the end of these next few minutes, you may look at that wrinkled little nut differently than you ever have. But to understand why, I have to give you one idea first, one lens. Because if you carry this single idea with you, everything else I tell you will click into place. Here's the lens. For most of our lives, we were taught to eat defensively. Avoid the bad fats, avoid the salt. Avoid, avoid, avoid. And that's not wrong, but it's only half the picture. And it's the less important half once you're past 60. Because there's a profound difference between a food that is simply harmless and a food that is biologically active on the artery itself. One just stays out of the way. The other rolls up its sleeves and goes to work. Let me explain what goes to work actually means, because this is the part that changes everything. Your arteries are not pipes. We talk about them like plumbing, but a pipe is dead and an artery is alive. The inner lining, a single delicate layer of cells called the endothelium, is one of the most active tissues in your entire body. It senses pressure. It releases compounds that tell the vessel to relax and open, or to tighten. It manages inflammation, and as we age, that lining gets tired. It stiffens. It gets a little inflamed, quietly, in the background. What we call low-grade inflammation, the kind you can't feel. And stiff, inflamed, irritated artery walls are exactly where plaque likes to settle in and build. So the goal past 60 isn't just, don't make it worse. The goal is to actively feed that vessel wall the things that help it stay supple, calm the smoldering inflammation, and lower the harmful particles floating in your blood that lodge into the wall and start trouble. You want a food that, in a sense, works while you sleep, that's still doing its job on the inside of your vessels long after you've forgotten you ate it. Hold on to that image. A food that works while you sleep. Because that's the real reason I want to talk to you about walnuts. And it's the reason olive oil, as good as it is, was never the whole story. Let me start with the part most people think they understand. Cholesterol. You've heard the word LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol. And here's the truth most doctors won't say plainly. It's not really the number alone that matters. It's the particles and what they do to your vessel wall. I think of a patient, I'll call him Walter, 74, a retired postal carrier from outside Columbus, Ohio. Walter did everything by the book. Walked his dog, used his olive oil, took the medication his cardiologist prescribed. And his numbers were fine. But Walter felt like fine was just holding the line, and he wanted to know if there was anything he could actually do with his own two hands. So he talked about adding a small handful of walnuts to his day. Not instead of anything. In addition, what does the research say would happen for someone like Walter? In controlled trials, real randomized studies, where one group adds walnuts and the other doesn't, Adding walnuts consistently nudges LDL cholesterol down. Not dramatically, not like a medication, and I want to be very precise here. Walnuts are not a statin, and they do not work like one, but a modest, real, repeatable drop in the harmful particles, achieved with food. And here's the part that matters for Walter. It stacks on top of what his medication was already doing. It wasn't a competition. It was a partnership. So here's your first, what to do with this. If your numbers are fine, walnuts are a way to do a little more without doing anything risky. If your numbers aren't fine, walnuts are something to bring up with your doctor as an addition, never, ever as a reason to change or stop a prescription on your own. We'll come back to that, because it matters. Now let me take you one layer deeper, to inflammation. And here, I'm going to step back from any one patient, because honestly, the mechanism itself is the star of this part. Remember that smoldering, low-grade inflammation in the vessel wall? For a long time, we didn't have much to offer for it through diet that we could measure. But walnuts are unusual. They are one of the very few plant foods rich in a particular kind of omega-3 fat, the plant cousin of the fats you hear about in fish oil. And alongside that, they carry a dense load of polyphenols, protective plant compounds concentrated right in that papery skin most people don't think twice about. When researchers measured markers of inflammation in people who regularly ate walnuts, they tended to see those markers settle, a calming of exactly the kind of background inflammation that drives plaque over years. This is the works while you sleep idea made real. You're not feeling anything, there's no sensation. But on the inside of the vessel, the environment is becoming a little less hostile, a little less inflamed, meal after meal, month after month. And here's a wait, I've never seen it that way moment for you. We tend to think of food as fuel, calories in, energy out. But some foods are better understood as information. They send a signal to your tissues. Walnuts send a calming signal to a vessel wall that, by your age, has been quietly irritated for decades. That's a different category of eating entirely. Now to the part that I find the most remarkable, and it's about flexibility, the actual suppleness of your artery wall. There's a measurement we use called endothelial function, essentially, how well your artery can relax and open when it's supposed to. A stiff, aging artery does this poorly. A healthy one does it beautifully. And this matters enormously, because a vessel that can't relax properly is a vessel under more strain, more pressure, more wear. Let me give you a face for this. I think of Eleanor, 68, a former school teacher from Asheville, North Carolina, who came in more worried about her memory and her energy than her heart, though of course they're all connected through the same blood vessels. Eleanor was skeptical. She said, and I'm quoting her, "Doctor, it's a nut. How much can a nut really do?" Fair question, the honest one. Here's what the research shows. In studies where people added walnuts to their daily routine, measures of that artery flexibility improved. The vessels relaxed and opened a little better. And there were larger, longer studies, including major trials specifically designed around older adults eating walnuts every day for a year or more, that looked at exactly this population, your population, people past 60, and found favorable signals for blood vessel health and for the cholesterol particles, without harm, without weight gain, when the walnuts replaced less helpful snacks. That last detail matters, and we'll get to it. So for Eleanor, the answer to "how much can a nut really do" was more than you'd guess, and exactly in the places that age tends to wear you down. The flexibility of the vessel, the inflammation in the wall, the particles in the blood. 3 different problems, one small food touching all of them. And now, let me address the comparison you've been waiting for, because the title of this whole conversation made a promise, and I intend to be honest with you about it. Is a walnut better than your olive oil? Here's the precise answer. They're not really enemies, and the truth is more interesting than a winner and loser story. Olive oil is wonderful. It's a cornerstone of the most heart-protective way of eating we've ever studied. But olive oil is largely a good fat that stays out of trouble. The walnut does that and brings the plant omega-3s and the polyphenols that actively work on inflammation and the vessel wall. So the headline shouldn't be "throw out the oil." The headline is, you've been giving all the credit to one player on the team, while a quieter teammate was doing some of the most important work all along. And is a walnut better than your statin? No. Let me be as clear as I have ever been about anything. A walnut is not a statin, does not replace a statin, and nobody watching this should ever adjust their medication based on a video. If your doctor has you on a cholesterol medication, that decision was made for reasons specific to you. What the walnut offers is something to add to the foundation, a way to do more, not a door out of medicine. Any honest reading of the evidence puts the walnut firmly in the category of a powerful helper, not a substitute. I'd be lying to you if I framed it any other way, and you deserve better than that. So let me turn this from "here's the finding" into "here's exactly what to do." Because a fact you can't use is just trivia. Start with the portion, and resist the urge to overdo it. Because more is not better here. A small handful a day, roughly what fits in your cupped palm, about 7 to 10 whole walnuts, or a quarter cup of halves, is the kind of amount studied, and the kind that does the job. These are rich, calorie-dense little things, and that brings me to the single most common mistake I see, the one that cancels the whole benefit. The mistake is adding walnuts on top of everything else you already eat. That's how people gain weight and undo the good. The trick, and this is the whole secret, is to make the walnut a replacement, not an addition to your calories. Swap it in for the cracker, the chip, the cookie, the handful of pretzels at 3 in the afternoon. When the walnut takes the place of something less helpful, you get all the benefit and none of the downside. The studies that looked best were built exactly this way. A few more practical things. Eat them with the skin on. That papery, slightly bitter brown layer is where a lot of the polyphenols live, so don't rub it off. Choose them raw or lightly toasted, rather than heavily salted or candied. The sugar and salt coatings work against you. Keep them in the refrigerator or freezer, because those good fats can go rancid at room temperature over time, and a rancid nut is doing you no favors. And timing barely matters. Morning, afternoon, sprinkle on your oatmeal, tossed in a salad, eaten plain on a walk. Consistency is what counts. A handful most days for months beats a heroic bowlful once. Now, the most important tool I can give you isn't about the nut at all. It's about how you walk into your next appointment. Because I want you to be a partner in your care, not a passive passenger. So here are the questions to bring. Ask your doctor. Given my heart history, is there room for me to add a daily handful of walnuts safely? Ask, are there any reasons in my case, allergies, my kidney situation, my medications, that this wouldn't be smart? And ask, if I make this change and keep it up, what should we be watching together at my next blood work? These are good questions. A good doctor welcomes them. And here's something worth knowing. If a doctor brushes off a thoughtful, modest question about diet entirely, with no reason given, that reaction itself tells you something about whether you're being treated as a whole person or as a chart. You have every right to ask. Asking is not difficult patient behavior. It's exactly what ownership of your own health looks like. Let me leave you with the bigger picture, because in the end, this was never really about a nut. There are 2 ways to eat once you're past 60. The first is to eat defensively, to spend your days avoiding harm, subtracting, restricting, eating to not get worse, and there's a place for that. But it's a small, gray way to live. The second way is to eat to actively build, to feed your body, and especially those living, working blood vessels, the things that help them carry you forward with energy and steadiness and independence. To eat not just to avoid the hospital, but to keep doing the things that make your life yours. The walks, the grandchildren, the garden, the mornings in your own kitchen with the light coming in sideways. The walnut is a small thing, but it stands for a larger truth I want you to take with you. You are not powerless here. You are not just a passenger waiting for the next test result. In a bag behind the flower sits a small, ordinary food, studied for decades, that actively works on the very vessels that carry your life through every day you have left. And you get to decide, starting with your very next meal, to give it a place on your plate. So tomorrow morning, when you reach for that olive oil, and please do, keep it. Let your other hand reach a little further back in the pantry too. Add the quiet teammate. Not as a cure, not as a replacement for anything your doctor has wisely given you, but as one more small, honest act of taking care of the heart that has never once stopped taking care of you. If this gave you something useful, something true, please subscribe. That's how I know to keep making these, and how this finds the next person who needs to hear it. And do me a favor. Down in the comments, Tell me one small swap you're going to make this week. Walnuts in place of the afternoon cracker? Tell me. I read them, and there is something powerful about saying a change out loud where others can see it. Your heart is worth that handful, and you're worth the few honest minutes it takes to learn how to protect it.